Hello, welcome to At Pace, the live radio show on people and culture. I'm Jonathan Rodrigues. I'm the coordinator for the People and Culture Association, also known as the PCA. And joining me today are, of course, David Little and Tal Wachesta. Tal, of course, is the director of Paragon Law. He's a senior immigration and business lawyer. And David, of course, is the CEO and the chief consultant of the TCM Group. It seems like our LinkedIn link has been broken. We're going to try and fix that in the back end, but the YouTube link is still on. So, those of you who are still joining us on YouTube Live, welcome to the AdPace radio show. This is, of course, a live show. It's unscripted, unabashed view on people and culture trending topics. And I know today we're going to talk about immigration, diversity, and workplace culture. But before we start, I think a huge shout out to one of our colleagues at TCM, Lisa J, who's celebrating her birthday today. And in
Yeah,
many ways, she's the Lady J who kept the three of us together. A few was very much connected with something that we were working on last year. So a big shout out to LJ there. But welcome once again to the Ad Based Radio Show. Before we get started, I think just a little bit more about the PCA. It is a growing, diverse, very, very vibrant group and hub of people and culture professionals from different parts of the world who are joining us as members. I will be sharing some information about the membership, so check out that kicker at the bottom of your screen. Um, Besides, of course, having Tal and David talk about immigration and diversity today, which is a very important part of the whole people and culture, I would say, environment at our workplaces, it was also an excuse to bring two schoolboys, two classmates together for a problem meeting after decades. So before we get into the more serious stuff about Suella Braverman and boats and research reports, I think let's just get down to what was it like, Tal, David, in school decades ago?
we had a lot of fun, Tal, didn't we? We went to a wonderful school called Fernwood in Woolerton in Nottingham, and I've not seen you since really since school, well, since sixth form, Tal. So it's wonderful to see you again. We had a lot of fun at school, and
We
very good
did.
friends.
We did. At what point did you start at Fernwood, David? I was trying to recall that before this call. Were you there through the infants,
Yeah,
juniors, comprehensive?
I was there from pretty much
Yeah, I
till I
thought
was
so.
6 years old.
Absolutely. So we were together from Jonathan from when we were 5 years old up
Yeah,
until 18 when we both went off to university. So
yeah,
played a lot of marbles in many playgrounds.
we absolutely did. We had a lot of fun. I think you always used to beat me, Tal.
Probably I was good at sport.
I mean, and it, that time, so many years ago, did it ever cross your mind? Of course, you were from different cultural backgrounds as well. Two little boys there in school. Did those things ever come up where you talked about, you would open about talking about, your cultural heritage, where you come from? Was that something that was spoken about, opened in the classroom, or whether did it really even matter at that point of time?
So we were at school in the 70s
Yep.
through to the 80s, and our particular school, Fernwood, I recall there was probably in my year maybe half a dozen people of color, maybe slightly more. And so for us, it was very much a case of adapting to a cultural environment that was predominantly white, working class, blue collar sort of background. Some of us found it easier, some of us found it more harder, but certainly I think it was an environment, and I'm sure school very much is like that, where when you're having banter, when you're picking on people, whatever an individual's weakness is, that's what people would pick on. So but it was never done with malice or an intent to sort of harm someone's feelings. I think it was just certainly that's how I felt it. With regards to that, and issues like culture and things never really were discussed, other than if David or someone came around my house, they would certainly have Indian food as opposed to English food.
Absolutely, and we used to have a lot of fun in each other's houses as well, but it was never really talked about as a topic in school. It was never kind of really referenced or thought about and given us any pointers. Maybe that was okay. Maybe we found our own way, Tal. Maybe it didn't matter to us. I think those friendships became very strong and very powerful, but it was never
Yeah,
addressed or talked about directly as within school.
yeah. And I always worry about institutions framing courses on say diversity, inclusion, and trying to frame what the conversation and the thought process should be without much. I don't know where this information comes from for them to create this information, but I'm glad that it happened organically in my upbringing, certainly.
Yeah, likewise, likewise.
And the million-dollar question, I think, Jens, is I think everyone wants to talk about is has there been a really massive shift on workplace culture in the UK? I mean, you're talking about an experience almost half a century ago, in your schools there, but what's been the impact of immigration since then on workplace culture in the UK on a more general note?
David, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, an incredibly positive one. I mean, to me, the
Can I just check with you, David? Sorry, David Attell. I think maybe one of us has our YouTube or LinkedIn on, so it's kind of echoing.
No, I've got no other platforms on.
nor I.
All right, let's check that on the back end. No worries, David. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I can hear. So no, I think it's been an incredibly positive contribution to workplace culture. Um, Diversity, diverse thinking, diverse ideas, diverse cultures within our organisations lends itself to a level of creativity and ideation that solves the problems and challenges in our society that cannot be achieved when we put people in a room who look at the world in the same way and think in the same way. So to me, thinking about immigration and its contribution to diversity within our workplaces has been critical. I think it's then the challenge for organisations whether they harness that diversity to create inclusive workplaces. I think one of the challenges often for really harnessing the potential of immigration and diversity is the notion of inclusion and giving people space to be heard, to contribute, to make that to be part of a bigger conversation about whatever it is that organisation is about. And to me, the big challenge for organisations is how they harness the power of that. And I guess the challenge that we see and that I see and worries me enormously is that we're starting to see immigration use the language becomes toxic and noxious and harmful and actually almost seen as a negative feature within our society rather than an opportunity. And it worries me, not just because of the impact on immigration law, and I know we'll come to that, but also about how organisations perceive diversity and creating inclusive workplaces. Just when I think we were starting to make really positive headway in the area of inclusion, my fear is that some of the language is becoming almost taking a step backwards. So there's lots of great work we can do, and I think has happened as a result of immigration into our workplaces and our society more widely.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, David, everything that you've said there. And I think it's one thing that's helped is that we hold each other accountable. I mean, what I mean by we is whether we're employees in the organization or we're a customer to a particular organization, more and more we want to see that the business is properly having policies and integrating it as part of their values, that they're looking to see, that they're looking to encourage diversity within their workforce, and the benefits of that are huge to any organisation if they look at that. For example, at Paragon Law, our board of directors of 5, 3 are women, and 3 are people of colour, and whether you expand that to an SME like that, or if you expand it to a larger business, or even to a country, those ideas that come together are just going to be so much more invaluable to an economy and also growth as well of an economy or of a business as well.
Absolutely, and I really agree with that. I think you've got a really important point there. Is that diversity and thinking And like diversity of experience and backgrounds and cultures adds growth and is an asset. And suddenly this becomes a powerful driver of organizational growth, but also for individual growth, I think, Tal. For us to grow as individuals and to learn more about each other and gain insights into each other. And I think that's a very rich space for us to grow individually, for teams to grow collectively, and organisations to grow. And diversity very much sits within those measures of growth,
Mm.
individual, collective, and organisational. So it's great to hear what you're doing there in terms of the leadership and the organisation more widely.
I want to
And you can
bring your
understand
attention,
what the
Tal,
yeah, go on.
Chal, if you don't mind, I just want to kind of divert to this report. Actually, it's quite an old report. It was much before Brexit and much before even COVID hit us in the UK. In 2018, there was a survey that was conducted where 4 in 10 thought that British culture is undermined by multiculturalism. What do you
Mm.
feel about this? Because the study, which was conducted over 2 years then, it reflected a widespread frustration about the government's handling of immigration at that point of time. Do
Mm.
you think this is still relevant today?
I think very much so, and I think David picked on that in his opening remark about concerns about some of the rhetoric on immigration and the mindset that develops, be it in people as, if I can use the terminology, host nation, and those that are trying to assimilate into a new country. I got my friend ChatGPT to define culture. I want to read this because it's quite interesting. So just hear me out. It said culture refers to the shared beliefs, values, customs, behaviors, and artifacts that characterize a group or society. So you can see how if the media are saying there's mass immigration, people are coming across our shores, how certain people in certain communities would feel that their culture is under threat. Um, and at the same time, it's those who are also coming here, how they're going to assimilate to a new culture, and what that sort of middle ground is, where it's acceptable and where people see that there are benefits of having new values, which creates a new identity and culture for a country, something which historically America did very well. I believe that the entrepreneurship that we saw in the US, make pre certainly Trump, was because of the success of how they dealt with immigration, because no one really called it their country, because everyone other than the indigenous population were all immigrants there, and had the same benefits and the same obstacles to to get on with making life in a new country. It's how we, the UK, deal with that as well now, which I think is really important. And the rhetoric that's coming out from the government is inconsistent and probably swaying a bit more towards, right-wing ideology, for my liking.
Absolutely, and I think I did my degree in race and community relations in the late 80s and early 90s, just post Thatcher, post the major period. It's a really interesting period of social change in our communities, and this issue is present then. When we're looking back at Enoch Powell's rivers of blood speech. And sort of failure of integration, but my experience of working within communities and studying communities is actually there was a 2+2=5 effect. Diversity amplified and helped to grow positive positive communities and positive workplaces. And actually, where there was action taken by community leaders, local authorities, police, health, and other justice organisations to bring communities together and to break down some of the barriers and divisions that were often artificially created by the media and created by politicians. Actually, that integration was a significant contributor to community health, community well-being, and optimised and provided a fantastic opportunity, a very rich aspect within our communities. And I think we need to celebrate that and recognise that multiculturalism and diversity. We have to work at it. We can't just expect it to happen. But certainly when I was working in Leicester, after I finished my degree, and I was actively involved in community regeneration and renewal and community integration programs, actually where those organisations and agencies I've referenced work to support communities to come together. It was a powerful and very rich environment. We should celebrate that. And it feels like that rhetoric and the language, as you write, Tal, it feels very right wing, and it feels like it diminishes the incredibly positive contribution that diversity and multiculturalism brings to our organisation. It's not a threat, it's an opportunity. It's only a threat if we perceive it to be a threat because other people are telling us it's a threat. And it's a mask for, you know, failure of investment in local services, GP provision and elsewhere. Oh, then it's very easy for people to blame immigration for not having access to a GP. No, it's not. It's a failure of investment in our health and social care services. It's not a negative byproduct of immigration.
Yeah, no, completely agree. And I think, Jonathan, you touched on the point about Brexit as well. And if we look at the pro-Brexit rhetoric that was coming out there, it was all about taking control of our borders, controlling our own immigration policy, etc. And you know what and the vote was to leave the European Union, and one can argue that a large part of that, because of the rhetoric that was coming out and the scaremongering, was that people were scared of multiculturalism, and of the type of society that we have, say, for example, in our capital, London, or Leicester, as you were mentioning there, which is very diverse, and very successful. But for some reason, people were seeing that as a threat to their own identity.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So it does require work. Absolutely, Dave. You're right. We
Surely,
can't sit on our laurels.
yeah, surely a lot of work that's required. I think that's a clear distinction we make there between looking at it as a threat and as an opportunity. These are two different kind of perspectives, I would say. Over a year ago, I had this great opportunity to meet some filmmakers from New Zealand who were down in India for an international film festival, and they did this entire documentary on how uh, people who migrated to New Zealand found it really tough to then work with the local Maori folks there, plus the whites who had migrated there over decades and centuries. And it was a beautiful story, and they talk about a lot of different experiences. But one of the things they talk about is, and they keep saying this, it's regularly said during the documentary, where they say that we have given up a lot and we've sacrificed a lot to move into a new place and to integrate there. So when you have these kind of situations where there is fear, where there is anxiety about if there is that fear, as the report says, about um, certain people feeling like it's undermining British culture, it also gives you an opportunity to kind of address that. But then you have politicians who are using the language which is not appropriate, and a lot of broadcasters in the UK have condemned Suella Braverman's comments as almost starting a culture war of sorts. When she recently used the word invasion, that's a strong word to use. So I think the question then to you, gents, is what is the impact of this kind of negative messaging by leaders on immigration and diversity, and of course that leading on to attention in the workplace?
To me, it plays into the hands of oftentimes a very small minority of people who have a vested interest in division within societies, who perceive that having division within our society delivers a better outcome than actually bringing people together. So I think the first is it speaks to those people who are drivers of hate and division, and to an extent supports and gives them tacit license and tacit approval to engage in behaviours which are themselves divisive. And so I think the first thing is the rhetoric underpins some of those divisive and hateful behaviours, and I think it creates and builds a level of suspicion, and we're kind of back-footed instead of embracing and engaging and get dialogue, integration, understanding, insight, sharing, learning, and those powerful tools which are going to, I think, can create a very rich, multicultural, dynamic, diverse society and workplace. it puts seeds of grit into that, and it makes it much more difficult to have a really open conversation. So language really matters, and language is very important. And when we hear the language of the small boats and the division, and the language of that currently seems to, the rhetoric that comes through the debate around immigration, I worry because I don't think people necessarily really truly understand the power of language. Or maybe they do. I don't know, Tal. You might have some thoughts on this yourself, but maybe they do. Maybe they are deliberately playing to exacerbate and inflame levels of tension and hatred, or whether it's naive. But I listen to it and I think, wow, you really understand the impact of what you're saying and what you're doing and the harmful impact it's having. I don't know. Is it naive or do they do it deliberately? I don't know.
I think they do it deliberately, and that comes down to statistically. I think immigration is either the first, second, or third issue that people have been looking at when casting their vote in elections. And I think this is to some extent what this government is getting ready for. They probably saw the success with taking back control during the Brexit vote and the election, their last election. So they possibly feel that's a successful mantra to go with now to stoke that fear of immigration and the issues with the boats and undocumented migrants and Albanian asylum seekers, etc. It's also fair to say, I think it's important to say that I've been doing immigration law since 1996. And so through successive Labour and Tory governments, and on both sides, the Home Secretary, be it whether that they've been red or blue, have been brutal as far as I can see, and they've always been a battle in terms of immigration policy. I can't remember if it was David Blunkett or his successor during the Labour government, who was very critical of the system they had then and calling it a broken system and needing to get a control on illegal migration. And it really started from then, back in I think it was in when Tony Blair was asked a question during PMQs as to how many overstairs there were in the UK, and he said, "I don't know, possibly 400,000." And everyone was saying, well, if he's saying 400,000, it's got to be at least twice or three times more than that. And ever since then, the pressure on successive governments to get a control on immigration, and the media, who's the real opposition in all of this, almost taking them to task on this, and depending on which stance the paper has, being very brutal on immigration policy and migrants coming to the UK. I remember, Sun and Daily Mail sort of headlines about migrants at that time and asylum seekers, and Europeans are taking our jobs, etc., etc. What they're not doing is being honest about immigration. However, they need to be more honest about the fact that we're becoming an aging population. I think by the end of this decade, 50% of the population will be of retirement age or over. There's a global war on talent. People have got a choice to go to many countries if they're skilled or relatively skilled to look for employment. And we need the brightest and the best, but also low-skilled workers to come to the UK, and that's what they should be promoting and embracing, and telling the public we're not stupid in that regard. But if we're told what the honest statistics are and why immigration is important, I think people will then more likely embrace that, and it will make employers' job a lot more easier then, in terms of having a cultural and diversity policy that works and that people understand and don't think that HR is in conflict with what they read on some website the evening before.
Yeah, it's really, really important point. So, I mean, given that it spans sort of all political spectrums, do you think that institutionally, then, our political systems are xenophobic, and do you see, Tal, that the fear of immigration or the kind of public policy we have on immigration is likely to endure as it is? Do you think it's likely to get better under a change of government, or do you think this is it? This is how we tackle immigration and immigration policy in the UK, irrespective of
Yeah.
which party we have in power?
Yeah, I think xenophobia perhaps a bit strong.
Okay.
I'd like to think with when I look at the colour of Suella Braverman and Rishi Sunak, that they certainly shouldn't be that.
Yeah.
But as politicians who want to keep and retain power, they will continue to use the same rhetoric if they believe that it's going to win them an election. It just purely comes down to that, retaining power and
It's an
stoking
interesting
that
one.
fear in people that they're the party that can control that fear that they have in terms of what's happening with immigration.
You've referred to to the colour of both Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman there and their
Backgrounds,
heritage,
cultural backgrounds. Yeah.
backgrounds. But how does that equate to the concept of xenophobia if they're driving xenophobia? I am puzzled by that. Is it because of their cultural background? Does it mean that government policy isn't xenophobic and there isn't a fear of immigration? Or I'm curious to know that and understand that in terms of that potentially playing to greater levels of racism and xenophobia in our society. And if they're knowingly doing that, and if it's knowingly creating division within our communities, are they not driving public policy which is intrinsically xenophobic? And therefore, how do we balance that with what you said in terms of their cultural backgrounds and their own heritage?
I think it comes down to, again, being honest about what type of immigration we need. The fact that people do have to flee their countries of origin because of fear of persecution in their home country, because of race, religion, ethnic origin, social, political opinion, whatever the issue is. And not sort of tarnish everyone with the same brush that everyone's an undocumented illegal who's not genuinely coming here to claim asylum. I think it's just this, just how they're presenting it is very frustrating for me.
Mm-hmm.
They should, as South Asian Indians, know about the problems that have happened, say, for example, in India and Pakistan, and also the East Indians, that the Indians that had to leave East Africa at some point and things of that sort. But that, for some reason, when someone tastes a bit of power and they're in a position of power, they will just use that rhetoric, which will just keep them there, to stoke up that fear. And I don't know how we change that. Other than just, as a nation saying that's not true, that's not acceptable.
Yeah.
I think I've spent quite some time on language, and those of you who are joining us live on the At Pace radio show, we're talking about immigration, diversity, and workplace culture. And Tal, you bring up a big important point there about not categorizing every immigrant as someone who is an illegal immigrant, and because at the end of the day, it starts to influence thought process, start to influence the chat or the conversations at a dinner table for a normal family who might not even be in a diverse workplace. And I think we say that there's a lot that happens at work, but there's also a lot that happens outside work that starts to then influence our workplace culture. The discussions that we have at the dinner table, the discussions that we hear maybe in commute while we're traveling to work, back home, and it all starts to influence the way we think about immigration, the way we think about diversity. So the question is then to managers, to leaders today, to HR managers, to people and culture managers who are out there, what can they do proactively to start to address this? Quite early, much before the tension starts to build in a workplace. They know what's happening outside. They know that there are certain people who are propagating hate, who are propagating this kind of a negative vibe in society. And just because it's not happening in the workplace, they should be not taking it for granted that these things don't start to influence biases and prejudices of people who are at the workplace. So what can be done to kind of proactively, maybe this one's first to David,
Mm.
Yeah, I think. I mean, it's a really important question. I think the first one goes back to the kind of point that we're talking about at the beginning. There is really the positive benefits of creating an inclusive workplace where people feel a sense of belonging, a sense of togetherness, and a sense of connection. And maybe going back to the conversation that Tara and I had at the start there about when we were both growing up as young boys in Nottingham. Um, and creating a space whereby we could grow up together, we could connect with each other, and whether or not the school had a policy on this, Tal, I don't know, but certainly for an HR director or a senior leader in an organisation, creating an inclusive workplace, which means that our managers are skilled and equipped. As I said earlier, we have to work at this. So, for instance, if diversity leads to adversity and conflict and tension and disagreements, how skilled are our managers and leaders at bringing people together and creating spaces, safe spaces to resolve our differences, to learn and to gain insights from each other. So supporting managers to harness the power of diversity and to resolve issues when they problems when they occur, and also looking at our policy frameworks. If you look at the current systems in many of our organizations, they create exclusion and they exclude people from our workplaces and our teams. They create a binary and polarizing effect on people. So looking at our policies, processes and procedures in our workplaces and thinking about how can we modify those so that they bring people together, promoting dialogue and insight and learning. And again, when I was doing my degree in race relations, I remember pretty much every essay that I wrote ended with the best way of tackling endemic racism, institutional racism, prejudice, unconscious bias, it goes by so many different names, was to promote better and more effective education. And the best way to educate people in the workplace is to create safe spaces for people together to discuss their shared interests, but also to discuss the areas which are different, and that diversity shouldn't then lead to adversity. So I think organisations really focusing on this and getting this right then generate huge benefits for their workforce and for their organisations as a whole. So it's focus on those benefits rather than focus on, if you like, the risk as it's portrayed in the media at the moment. It's an opportunity, not a risk.
David, you mentioned a term there, unconscious bias, which I think possibly is more prevalent than we know in organizations. And what do you recommend to organizations when you go in terms of bringing that to the forefront and dealing with issues that might cause that? If you think of the sort of iceberg and those things that are above the iceberg, people are happy to talk about and be upfront about. But usually the iceberg's a lot bigger underneath the waterline, and
Yeah,
bringing
absolutely.
those issues to the forefront and make as part of the belonging point that you referenced there.
Well, I don't think you can do, Tal, is deal with this in a classroom on an unconscious bias training classroom-based event. In my experience, the best way to address and challenge some of those hardwired beliefs. So this is talking about hardwired beliefs, prejudices, fears, anxieties, aspirations. The way to address those is through direct contact and dialogue with others. And if we see the other as the problem, if we see the other, the boats, we see the other being shipped off in planes, and we describe the other in these negative terms, it makes it very difficult to address these issues. And then we sit in a classroom and talk about these issues in a very esoteric and conceptual way, and we try and figure out what's going on in our minds around unconscious bias. And it feels to me very much like that's putting a tick in a box to say, yes, we've done it. And I don't think that's the most powerful nor the most effective way of addressing these issues. So rethinking our concept of other, and rethinking those principles around building allyship skills for our managers, for our, the best skill that our leaders can develop is those principles of allyship. And what do I mean about that is co-creating a positive workplace culture where all voices are included and all members of our workplace community are treated as human beings and treated with respect and dignity and deep understanding. And that then creates a powerful space whereby those hardwired beliefs and prejudices and unconscious biases become challenged. So I think it requires a bit of a repurpose of the way we think about the concept of the other, and then sit in a classroom and tick a box to say, well, we've got that one covered. I don't think that's going to work out.
Guess what, gents? I think I fixed something on the YouTube, on the YouTube and StreamYard kind of echo that was coming. It's because you two haven't met for decades. Every time both of you have your mics on, it starts to echo. But for those of you who's once again joining us live on the At Pace radio show, we're talking about immigration, diversity, and workplace culture here. We're talking about organizations that may be at risk at, dealing with this kind of tension at the workplace. And I think one organization, or I would say establishment, where I'm really want to try and get into right now, and tell this is for you, is with regards to the home office. I think that's the place where the action is happening. They're seeing the conversations outside, the language that's being used by the politicians, by others involved. The home office itself is facing legal action over treatment of tens of thousands of people in the UK who are said to be denied employment rights and benefits. Uh, Somewhere in 2019, there were close to around 372,000 people whose right to work here was put on hold for quite some time. And there is also that fear within the home office staff, and there's a news report that's been published recently about the home office staff, and the Guardian publishes this there, and they talk about that they're being worried about being asked to act illegally in this culture of fear that the politicians are driving through. So, do you have any insight of what the workplace culture looks like there in the home office? Because that's an organization that consists of individuals who work there, who are from different backgrounds themselves. You have people from different ethnicities who have actually got jobs in that organization and are working there itself. And so, any insight into what's going on over there, and is the workplace culture, and that's a controversial question here, but is the workplace culture toxic at this point of time at the home office?
You've just on
Microphone. Yeah, sorry, I was. Yeah, it's a great question, Jonathan. I have no direct information or experience on what the culture there is like, other than to say that they're under a great deal of pressure, the home office staff, in terms of turning around cases. That there's probably not enough investment by the leadership in people's training, development, bringing staff on board to be able to turn around cases. There's asylum cases that have been in the system for many years, and more cases keep being added to the backlog. And hence another one of Braverman's concerns about getting control on asylum and illegal migration. But it can't be, this is just my perception, a great place to be working at the moment with those types of pressures. Certainly, I also know that last year, the PCS, the Public and Commercial Services Union, that represents a lot of the Home Office, was one of the organisations that took legal action against the Home Office's proposed policy on shipping people off to Rwanda for their asylum cases to be processed. So, if anything, that shows that they do have a concern about the rule of law and human rights and things of that sort. But it's just finding that balance of having to do the job that their boss is saying, the Home Secretary, doing it within a certain time frame, which perhaps results in sloppy decision making because of that pressure, and which creates work for lawyers like myself to then appeal those decisions. But, but beyond that, I'm not sure if the culture is necessarily toxic or racist or anything of that sort. David, I don't know if you've done any training with the Home Office or.
I do know the Home Office, but I can't comment on the culture of the organisation at all. I don't have any insights into the notion of culture. And of course, culture in its sense is a complex thing to try and summarise it in very simple terms. But we can look at if we want to try and understand some issues around culture, we can look at the recommendations that have come out recently in terms of the CBI and the culture there. We can look at the Louise Casey, the Baroness Casey review into the Metropolitan Police. We can look at other public institutions from fire and health and so on and so forth to try and start to gain insight in terms of the culture, the prevailing culture in some of the organisations perhaps who are being affected by some of these issues. So I can't comment specifically on the Home Office per se, above and beyond any other public or governmental body. However, the evidence is starting to stack up from the evidence from the reports that are being produced that some of these cultures are not healthy, they're not safe, they do not welcome inclusive, diverse practices within the organisation. And I think there's a lot of learning that can be done across the public sector. I just kind of reflect on some of the comments that have been coming through, some really great comments as well. So Annabelle's talked about bias is nothing unconscious about it. I just want to absolutely echo and support that view. I think one of the things that I think, again, going back to the conversation we're having around unconscious bias and the idea we could sit in a training room and we become aware of our unconscious bias and we kind of handle them is anathema to me. It is these are hardwired behaviours that need to be challenged within individuals, and they're about making the choices that we make, the words that come out of our mouth and the language that we use, the choices that we deliberately make. I do believe as a mediator and a restorative justice practitioner, however, that with good quality information, good quality dialogue, we can rewire and we can make different choices and better choices. And that's the point I would be making about supporting and developing inclusive, just, fair, transparent, open, healthy, harmonious workplaces, is that we are sending out very clear messages around acceptable and unacceptable behaviours, but also creating opportunities to build bridges based on dialogue and openness and understanding. That to me is a very healthy culture. And I think it's those cultures that I see which are the ones that are likely to thrive in the future.
Any parting thoughts from you, Tal, especially for someone who is into business immigration as well, and you're helping a lot of actually companies and organizations to recruit some of these skilled workers. What role can immigration law firms, immigration lawyers play in this as well? Because that's kind of the first stage as well, to kind of when you're bringing someone into an organization, you're bringing someone into a culture from a whole different world. Is there something that immigration lawyers can get involved way beyond what their typical, I would say, profile is, and work towards this integration of sorts of different cultures?
I think immigration lawyers can choose to do that if they want. Though me personally, I just want to focus on my niche and make sure that I can add value to my clients through my expertise in helping them hire the brightest and the best, or whatever skills they need in their organization. And then ensuring that they comply with Home Office policies in terms of managing their sponsor licenses. I think it's for organizations to inform their leadership, or for the leadership to understand that by having a diverse workforce and work around culture will ultimately help productivity and growth in the organization, and ensure that businesses will retain their staff and be able to recruit. I certainly believe that. Certainly, this next generation, I forget what they're called, Generation X or N or whatever it may be.
Alpha.
Is it? Okay. And the ones above them are a lot more tuned to this type of stuff, and will be looking at how diverse an organization is, what their practices are in terms of inclusion and belonging. And with the passing thought there is that, with that sort of generation coming up and those coming underneath them, that hopefully it's not all doom and gloom like how myself and David started, and that there is light at the end of the tunnel with this new future leadership that will come through our organizations that share a more multicultural world.
Yeah, just like the multicultural world that you and David shared as young schoolboys back in the 70s. And on that note, I think we're kind of nearing the end of this At Pace Radio show. It's been a fantastic conversation, very honest conversation about things that might seem quite delicate. I think the writing's on the wall here. I hope wisdom prevails in the language and tone that's being used by people who are in a position of power, who are in a position where the media takes every word that they say and spins it around. Because uh, it's beyond politics, right? Immigration diversity is beyond politics. That starts affecting people at the dinner table, people in a
Yeah.
commute, people at the workplace, which can lead to a lot of things emotionally, mentally, psychology for people. And of course, in worst case scenarios, even lead to crime. So I think this report that I had referred to earlier about, the way I said 4 to 10 people feel like it's affecting British culture, also said there is a need for a national conversation on immigration and diversity. And I guess we have done our part today to start that conversation, and we hope to keep that going. But thank you, Tal. Thank you, David, for making time on a Friday afternoon and joining us on the At Pace Radio Show.
Been great. Thank you, Jonathan. And Tal, it's great to see you again. Looking forward to seeing you in Nottingham when I'm up next.
No, I look forward to that, David. Likewise, if I'm in London, I'll hook up with you. And Jonathan, thank you for the invitation. Really enjoyed it.
My pleasure.